You're listening to the Daily Mishnah Podcast with Benedict.
We've left the ox and we're going on to the other kinds of damage. In the following Mishnah, the next Mishnah, we're going to look at fire. The Mishnah will meditate quite extensively on fire. But at the moment, we're still on these crop-destroying animals. What if an animal destroys the crop? And we're going to look at a Mishnah in the 6th chapter, which is actually a mirror image of one that we've already learned in the 5th chapter. And we learned the 5th chapter with regard to the ox which bit. And now we're gonna learn it with regard to some other animal, just a regular crop destroying animal which just eats. So we're gonna, if you like, we're in the 6th chapter here. We're going to be in a mirror image of the 5th chapter, which we learned a couple of weeks ago. But let's jump into the Mishnah and then we'll see. Hamakdish l'tok sedei chavero shelo birashut achalatan behemato shel bal hasadeh patur. Some person stacks his sheaves. Hamakdish, someone who stacks his sheaves. L'toch sedei chavero, in his fellow's field. He stacks them in some field that doesn't belong to him. Shelo birashut, without permission. He just puts his stuff in another person's field. And what happens to his sheaves? Well, they get eaten. Achalatan behemto shel ba'al hasadeh. The owner of the cattle of the owner of this field eats them up. And the Mishnah, not unreasonably, says, Patur, he's exempt. We're only responsible for guarding something that we have responsibility for. And we don't have responsibility for something which our neighbor just dumped in our yard. And it goes further. If it was injured by them, that means if the cattle belonging to the owner of the yard is injured by, I don't know, some straw sticking out of this sheaf of wheat, or maybe there was something poisonous or dangerous stuck in the sheaf of wheat. If the cattle are injured by this sheaf of wheat, the owner of the cattle, the owner of the wheat is responsible. In other words, and we've learned this principle before, when you go onto someone else's property, you have to take special care not to damage it. And you absolutely have no rights. If you go on without permission, you have absolutely no rights if something on that property damages you. And then this Mishnah concludes, Ve'im higdish birshut bal hasadeh chayav. If he made the stack with permission, in other words, if he had permission to dump his sheaves in this field, at that point, the owner of the field is responsible. Bal hasadeh chayav. And here we are going to differ slightly from the previous Mishnah in chapter 5 that we already learned. So let's go back and look at that previous Mishnah. We're now in the 5th chapter. Hang on a second while I just scroll down to the right point. We're in the 5th chapter. It's a parallel situation. Someone has brought his ox into the courtyard of a household without permission. So we're not stacking sheaves now, we're bringing an ox in. It's the 3rd Mishnah of the 5th chapter. Someone brings his ox into the courtyard of a household without permission. And what happens? And the householder's ox galls it. It's exactly parallel to someone stacking a sheaf in a field he doesn't own, and the ox of the owner of the field eats it. It's exactly parallel situation. And the Mishnah comes to exactly the same conclusion. patur, the householder is not liable. And furthermore, if this ox then creates damage on the householder's land, then the owner of the ox is liable. And then our Mishnah in chapter 5 then goes on, Im hichnis birshut bal hechatzer chayav. If he brought it in with permission, the owner of the courtyard is liable. And Rebbe says, Rebbe Omer b'kulam ad sheyekabel alav bal habayit lishmor. Rebbe says about all of these, the householder has to accept responsibility for guarding it. So in other words, giving permission is not enough. The householder has to accept responsibility for guarding it. And this effectively is what the Rambam says about our Mishnah now in chapter 6, that there must have been some guardian on that field, in wherever this field is. If the householder gave permission, by giving permission, the guard must have taken upon himself the obligation to guard it. So we do stick to our principle that until if something's coming onto your property, unless you accept the obligation to take care of it, you don't have a responsibility for it. You only have responsibility for you only have a duty to guard what you have a responsibility of.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the Daily Mishnah Podcast with Benedict.